Welcome to the Playwire Virtual Summit. Tagline COPPA 2.0. We're here to kind of decouple or understand better what's COPPA 2.0 mean, how does it affect us, and we have a great panel of people here to kind of explain. The beauty of this panel is they're all from different walks of life. We have some from the agency, we have some from a company called KRU, which I'll explain in a second, and then we have an actual publisher. So a few rules of engagement before we start. One, I want everyone to ask questions, right? We want this to be an interactive presentation. On the bottom of the screen, if you've never done a Zoom, I'm assuming everyone's done hundreds of Zooms by now, but just in case you haven't, on the bottom, there is either raise hand or ask questions, it's Q&A. Please type them in there and we're gonna hopefully answer them in real time as we go, because we don't want this to be static. We want your questions, we want to be able to answer them. So awesome. So as we're kind of moving through this, I'm going to make some quick introductions. My name is Jayson Dubin. I'm the CEO of Playwire. I've been doing this for 15 years, which is like dog years for digital media. So that means I've been doing this for almost 150 years. We have Anthony Alexander, who's our EVP of global sales. He handles all brand sales for us globally. So that includes, United States, where he has offices in New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Florida, includes London, APAC, and Canada, where we all have people out on the streets. We're very lucky to have Dona Fraser, who's the SVP of privacy. So prior to this, so she's part of KRU, which is part of the Better Business Bureau, and I'll let her explain that later. She's also a lawyer from Brooklyn, and before that, she was on the ESRB and Sony. So huge amount of expertise in just regulations, in particular on kids and COPPA. We have Mamie Kresses, who's the VP of KRU. She graduated from the University of Georgia of Law. She's been at the FTC. Prior to KRU, she was in the FTC Bureau of Consumer Protection for 30 years. From what I understand, she's one of the people who actually brought COPPA and the regulations to life. So, this is a person who kind of helped bring this all together. And lastly, we have Abhi. Arya. Abhi, your camera's still off. I like to call Abhi, I've known him for years. I like to call him the Swiss Army knife because he's just done everything and runs the company. But he was at Pearson, Cadbury, P&G, and then currently runs Sandbox, a suite of products designed to entertain and educate kids, from Pop Tropic to Funbrain to Fact Monster, CoolMath, and Hopster. And last but not least, we have Steve Birnbaum. I got a little fun fact. Steve is now in California. He used to be in New York. Steve and I went to the same high school. I knew his brother. Not relevant, but little tidbit of information. And he is the EVP of Spark Foundry. He's been there for quite some time. Before that, he's at Condé Nast and Starcom. So that's kind of your lineup. We're going to make this very interactive. And real quick, you know what? Before we start, I mentioned KRU, which is a big part of this conversation. KRU is basically the nation's first safe harbor program under the Children's Online Protection Act. It stands for the Children's Advertising Review Unit. It helps companies comply with the laws and guidelines that protect children from deceptive and inappropriate advertising to ensure that in an online environment, children's data is collected and handled responsibly. Does that summarize that, Dona and Mamie?
That does.
Yes,
that
thank you.
Because it came right off your website. Perfect.
Sounded familiar.
Awesome. So welcome, guys. Anthony, you want to go to the next slide? So real quick, so who is Playwire? I'm going to introduce myself. So why do people use Playwire? One, Playwire's got a mass reach. We work at lots of different sites and all kind of walks of life, from OTT to COPPA to app. And publishers entrust us with their advertising because it's a complex ecosystem. There are a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of compliance. There's a lot of legality. So we're managing the ads for all these sites, both from an advertising perspective and from a publisher perspective. We're one of the few companies that can do what's called customizable scale, rolling out your custom executions to all these sites through one conduit. We really pride ourselves in quality and performance and guarantee these results. And we're brand safe. So if you look at the bottom, we're KRU certified, we're Kids Safe certified, we're Google certified, we're a GCP partner, which stands for Google Certified Publishing Partner. They only let in 2 in North America last year, and we're one of them. And we're tag certified. So if you want to work with the big boys like P&G, Unilever, and Procter & Gamble and Cadbury, they don't touch you unless you're tag certified. So that's a little bit about Playwire. So what are the key initiatives that Playwire is working on this year? So beyond, we're very mobile web and desktop focused to date. But moving forward, we've rolled out our COPPA SDK that's also kid safe and KRU certified. We're doing header bidding in app. We're getting into OT header bidding for kids, and we're just growing our teams globally across the board. In fact, we actually come up with some of our own technology called CAM, which is kids contextual targeting practices, to be able to target, not target, but advertise the kids in a COPPA compliant manner. Next. So today's agenda, we're going to cover 4 main topics. So children's privacy, COPPA 2.0, the threats of online advertising. We're going to define kids education platforms, so EdTech. We're going to navigate the new worlds of kids advertising. And lastly, what's new with Playwire in our kids club vertical. So with that being said, I'm going to let Anthony Alexander kind of take the helm from here.
Trying to find the mute button. I'm not going to forget that this round. So guys, thank you all for being here. Very excited to walk you through. Got a great panel. We're going to start with KRU, right? And talking about COPPA 2.0 and talking about compliance. But I think before we frame up COPPA 2.0, it's important to understand how we got here, where we're at, what the laws are today. So Dona and Mamie, I'd love for you to just kind of give us a high level, where we at, what is COPPA law today?
Right. So I want to make it clear that, where we are today is where we remain, which is under, the COPPA original law. In late 2019, the FTC announced that it would undertake a COPPA rule review. And essentially what that means is that they will take a look at the rule, not the law, but the rule, which helps companies really understand in greater detail how to navigate through the law, how to drill down on some of the specific issues that are in the law and provide guidance. The call out to the FTC here is to help modernize COPPA, how it applies. But as everyone knows, there's been great discussion about raising the age of COPPA, and that requires a change to the law. So the rule review will not address that, right? It will address other issues. And to put things in context as to how urgent and imperative this rule review is for the ecosystem, when the last, Mamie can attest this because she was at the FTC and give more context to it, but when the last rule review started in 2010, it was completed in 2013, went into effect in 2014. And I think when the public comment period opened, I think we probably had less than 100 comments, right, submitted total. There were over 175,000 comments submitted at this last rule review in December. So that gives you a sense of how things have evolved and what we're looking at the landscape. So this really gives you a sense of where things have gone just in 2020, right? So the Washington State AG's case, TikTok, and obviously, the child targeted apps. So there's just this urgency to address what's happening in this space.
Hey, Dona, real quick, if you don't mind. So we mentioned KRU. I kind of gave a brief snippet. Maybe you can explain. Sure. First of all, we're a member of KRU just for transparency purposes, partners. Maybe you can explain what KRU is and how you kind of work within this ecosystem so people have context that like how you're playing a part in this role.
Sure. So KRU really has 2 sides of its business, right? Obviously, the Children's Advertising Review Unit, and we were founded in 1971 to really help, 74 rather, to help address children's advertising, right? And truth in advertising to kids, non-deceptive practices, and to really help companies understand how best to communicate to children in a way that's transparent and truthful. When KRU started looking at what was happening in the online space, we started to discover there's also this issue of data collection that's probably attached to advertising. What does that mean and what's happening in that space? And KRU created these online privacy practices to help companies navigate in the digital world. That became the foundation for what we now have as COPPA. And then when the COPPA rule went into effect in 2000, KRU applied to the FTC to be the first COPPA safe harbor. And what that means is that as a safe harbor, when companies join our safe harbor program, we help them comply with the law and the rule under COPPA, and they receive a seal on their site, right? Which basically says that they're compliant, and we safeguard them, right? A safe harbor essentially says that you're compliant with COPPA, and also that if the FTC or another regulator comes knocking on your door to say you're not compliant, we as your safe harbor take that challenge on for you, and we shield you from hopefully investigations and fines, right? That's really the value of being in a safe harbor. Law firms can't do that for you. Individuals can't do that for you. Only safe harbors can do that. We were the first. There's 7 in the country, and we were the first FTC approved safe harbor.
Yeah, and if I can just take a moment to plug Carew, I will tell you that coming from the FTC, it was me and one colleague who worked to vet safe harbors, decide who was worthy of the program, who met the law, who understood the motivations behind the law, who was really doing the work. And yes, Carew was our first safe harbor. Here we are many, many years later, and I'm at Carew, so I hope you can take that as my endorsement of Carew's, the strength of Carew's program. So as we go forward, as we move to, wait to see what the FTC does on the COPPA rule, and I would expect, no one has a crystal ball, I would expect there will be some change to the rule by virtue of the recognition that it was time to review it again. Carew's safe harbor will be there with the expertise to work on the future changes and help guide businesses through it.
Yeah, I think that's a transition into the reason we're here. Like, what is COPPA 2.0, and again, we're not there yet, right? These are legislative proposals, and we want to be very clear about that. But the implications of these proposals obviously affect the publisher a great deal. They affect how advertising planning strategies work moving forward. So Carew team, can you just give us a quick high level, like what is COPPA 2.0 and how would it change things?
All right. Go ahead, Mamie. Go ahead.
Again, as Donna said a minute ago, we do not have a crystal ball, but what we do know is there's a lot of activity in this space. We have, Senator Markey and Senator Cassidy with their bill that would raise the age of COPPA. There are different interpretations of what that bill would do and who would have, where the onus would fall to get verifiable parental consent for these older children. There are also bills in the House, and as Donna mentioned, the FTC is reviewing the rule. As Donna said, the age of the rule cannot change without legislation. And we don't know whether any of these bills will actually pick up enough traction to become law. But the point is that there's a lot of advocates out there also who are unhappy with a lot of the advertising and marketing to children online. They are unhappy with the data collection, whether they've got it right or not. And sometimes, they don't necessarily have it right. But that's why the industry needs to work really carefully to be transparent about what you are and aren't collecting and what partnerships you do and do not engage in. To ensure that, these are informed decisions. Do we really does the law really need to be changed for the problems that are being,
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And look, there's probably a reason why all of our vendors are on this call, because there's a reason why they need to care, right? Like, why do they need to care? They need to care for this exact reason. Now, before I actually tee this up for you, is, just to frame up COPPA 2.0, it's moving COPPA age to either 16 or 18 theoretically, and having to provide consent between, 13 and 16 or 13 and 18. So just out of curiosity, states like California are already tightening their data collection practices, and especially in that demo range. CCPA, for example, which kind of mimics GDPR. Do you hear rumblings that other states might be following suit or considering similar kinds of legislation?
So Virginia's new privacy law addresses the teen space. Washington's proposed laws have addressed the teen space. We expect that that's going to continue to be the trend, right? And these state laws are limiting the scope as it deals with teens, right? And that's okay. We could probably manage the limitations of it. It's the proposed language in some of these new legislative options for COPPA 2.0 that broaden the scope, right? And that's what we're trying to hopefully narrow, right? So I think your vendors your advertisers need to be really aware of the optics, right? It's oftentimes the optics that get companies in trouble, right? It's about what they appear to be doing versus once we figure out, we start to investigate, what they're really doing, right? And so addressing the optics of how you manage your best practices is really going to help.
Can you drill into that a little bit more? Like what does that mean, like optics? So
so oftentimes it may appear that you're collecting data from children. Once we, KRU, sometimes open up an investigation, we'll discover that's not what you're doing. Or you may be doing it in a way that behind the scenes, you're managing it in such a way that you're siloing data in different databases. You're putting in all these other securities and protections to protect that data that you do have. But that's not what we see as a user from the user perspective, right? It just seems like you're just collecting data and there's nothing there. And we know that most people, other than me, don't read privacy policies. So really people don't have a full understanding of what you're doing with that data. And at KRU, part of our goal in working with companies is to ensure that what you say you're doing is actually what's happening, and to make sure that there's synergy there.
I have two more questions on this real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens, hey, we all, everyone on this call has the best intentions. We all are looking up what happens if I made a mistake? Hey, we did something, we check a box. Are people still accountable in that aspect?
Yes, they are. And I think that there's an evaluation when those instances happen, right? So is this a one-time incident or are you just egregious, right? Have you just not really done your homework and built a system? And we'll talk about this later about privacy by design, right? And advertising by design as well, right? So if you're not doing that at the outset, and you're really just kind of willy-nilly about what the legislation is, what the laws are, what the guidelines are, regulations, all that sort of stuff, that all gets taken into consideration, right? Companies are going to make mistakes. And again, that's why you work with an organization like KRU, right? That's why you join a safe harbor, to shield you from the fallout of making those mistakes, right? There are going to be mistakes.
There's a reason
especially in the technology world.
And to find, to realize what some mistakes might be before they happen. But just very quickly to answer your question, the COPPA rule does not rely on, intent is not a factor. So if you had all the best intentions in the world, but you were collecting information without following that rule, yes, you still have exposure. The FTC might take into account your intent when it's coming up with civil penalties, to the extent that that it might be a factor, but it's not a factor.
So to paraphrase, they don't care. You make a mistake, you're SOL.
Well, you make a serious mistake,
right?
Yeah, all the intention in the world isn't going to change that.
Second question, I'll be quick. I know Anthony wants to go to the next slide. I'm a publisher. I own a website. I work with a vendor, not Playwire, vendor X. We'll call it like one of the SSPs. They are collecting. I'm the publisher. I'm not doing anything wrong. They're collecting data, third-party data. Well, for now at least, running on my site. Am I the publisher at risk, even though I did nothing wrong?
Yes.
Yes, the simple answer is yes. And when the rule was amended, and again, Mamie can dig in on this a little bit, but third-party liability was built in, right? So and it makes sense, right? Because first parties are going to engage with third parties to help them do what they need to do to deliver their services. But those third-party vendors and partners must comply with COPPA as well. So part of what KRU does is help vet those third-party vendors for you to make sure that they are complying with COPPA.
Well, let me make it easy for everyone on the screen. That's why we're part of KRU. There's a safe harbor just in case, that umbrella. And if you're not with us, you get it with us. If you're not with us, I highly suggest you speak to them because you need it.
Love it. So, moving it on, what does it mean to be directed towards children? The way that we've always got a lot of our brand buyers is, COPPA compliance is a two-way street. It starts with the publisher, but it's absolutely on the advertiser, from the creative to the tracking practices, et cetera. So it's definitely a two-way street. So can you walk us through a little bit about what directed to children actually means, and if just kind of the specifics around that?
Right. So this is typically the list that's used to determine whether or not a product is directed to children. And when we evaluate these things, we're not always looking at just one factor here. It's a multitude of factors combined. So I think the best example is use of animated characters. So look at that alone could potentially bring in to evaluation and determination under COPPA when you see a site whose audience is probably 18 or over, or 21 and over, because they use a lot of animated characters, right? Animation alone does not mean it's directed to children. So it's looking at these factors together to make a determination, right? And that's, again, something that KRU does to help companies figure this out. But I think it's important to see what these different factors are. And if you have multitudes of these, right, then we need to have a conversation about, yes, you're probably directed to children, or at least from an optics standpoint, you appear to be directed to children. Maybe, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think that's right. And it does get harder over time to figure out what is directed to children and what isn't, because, what we've learned in the last 20 years is that adults love kid-like stuff as much as kids do. But yeah, so it is a factor, and it's, you have to look at all of these things. And you also, frankly, have to pay attention once you're live, what's really going on. Because if you have, if you have knowledge that kids are on there, whether you wanted them or not, then you've got to figure out what you want to do here. Do you want the kids? Do you not want the kids? Do you want to channel the kids in one direction and channel everybody else in another? So you can't just rely on the fact that you thought you were general audience.
Yep. And look, the transition here that I just wanted to bring up is, I look at this slide and I see that YouTube has by far the biggest fine, right? Mm-hmm. So why? Like, what happened there? And, was something being directed towards kids on YouTube? Was it YouTube Kids? Can you walk us through a little bit of the intricacies there?
Sure. So YouTube wanted to have its cake and eat it too, right? YouTube advertised itself as being the place where kids are, and having many, many channels where kids are. And then knowingly in those kid channels working to do behavioral advertising, which in COPPA says if you track people to serve behaviorally targeted ads to them, you must get parental permission first. And that was not happening. So essentially, YouTube paid a huge fine, but it's actually, I want to not use the word fine because it's not a fine. They paid a huge civil penalty. But beyond that, they also had to change their business model, right? So if you mark a site as directed to children, that site is not going to have behavioral advertising. It will have contextual advertising, and they will sell advertising, but it's not going to be able to track those children everywhere they go on the web and watch them and serve advertising, unless the channel obtains prior parental consent.
Absolutely.
So Anthony, I'll just add briefly that, one of the things that was looked at and that we look at oftentimes is evidence about who your audience is, right? Looking at your marketing materials, looking at who you intend to be your website visitors, your customers, those who are going to download your apps, who's going to click on your ads. What's your marketing plan look like? Because that's a really good piece of evidence, empirical evidence to show, as Mamie said, intent is not the issue, but it does help us evaluate that, okay, it appears to be child directed, but your marketing is not. So how do we get you out of this hole, right? And you're kind of stuck. So how do we make it clearer for you, right? And I think, when the FTC opened the case against YouTube, and everyone was talking about the investigation, one of our jokes was that, I want to hear the arguments that YouTube has when they say we're not kid directed, yet you have a platform that's YouTube Kids. Kids is in the name, right? So good luck with the argument that you're not kid directed.
Yeah.
Real quick, Steve, from a creative perspective, as you're making creative and you're looking, so for argument's sake, when you're making creative, are you thinking about, is it animated or not animated? And then on top of that, are you looking at the content? So say someone's like, oh, it's not a COPPA site, but you look at it, you're like, well, it looks like it's for kids. It's got little ducks, whatever. So, do you kind of take all those factors into consideration?
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention creative and you just mentioned, when I look at the site, frankly, sort of like what, Mamie was saying, my intention may be there, but what I think in terms of looking at the site is certainly not enough. So we have to kind of go beyond that. From a creative perspective, I will say I have it a little bit easy, right? In the sense that partner with Mattel. Mattel does a lot of their creative in-house, and they are unbelievably judicious about where their creative is running, but also and we partner with them on that, but how they're actually going about kids marketing and thinking about what's going on behind the scenes as they're developing that creative. But from our perspective, specifically at Spark Foundry, right, when we're thinking about how we can partner with them on creative, often that's through a partner. So it's through a partner like Playwire, right? So it's thinking about how we can work with you to develop creative that we know is kid friendly and appropriately kid targeted. The most important thing for us often is, who is that partner, right? Are they a trusted partner? You're talking about how you work so closely with COPPA and Caru. That's one of the reasons that we're comfortable partnering with you guys. So it's almost a triple check system, I'd say, in the sense that you have our experts, your experts, the experts at Mattel, all weighing in before anything kind of goes in front of a kid.
One last thing I forgot to mention to the audience, Steve, what brands do you work on? There's one little tidbit I left out. So he's from Spark Foundry, but you work on little brands like
those small brands that Mattel owns, like Barbie, Hot Wheels,
monsters, huge brands like Mattel. So so glad to have your voice on here.
Love it. So we talked a little bit about creative and some of the best practices there. I think we're going to get a little bit more here in a minute. What we want to spend a little bit more time on is the day in the life, right? The day in the life of a kid has changed forever throughout COVID, and even post-COVID now, I guess it's post-COVID, is, their day has changed. What being in school means has changed. And there's obviously some best practices here that the Caru team has teed up for us in terms of compliance and safety measures there. But this is a big part of a kid's day. And if you're a brand and you want to stay top of mind, you got to kind of be there throughout their day to some degree. So, I'd love as a starting point, Caru team, what can you give us for both publishers and advertisers on, how, if you're a kid's educational platform, what should we be aware of from a safety standpoint?
It's essentially the same things that you would have to be aware of, right, if you weren't operating in a school environment, right? And so what we're looking at is, the first question I'll ask an advertiser or an operator is, what data you're collecting and what do you need, right? Versus what do you want? And let's figure out the needs and the wants, right? Because most want all the information they could possibly get, right? And hold on to it indefinitely. Can't do that. You certainly can't do that in a school environment, right? Because of FERPA, the Family Equal Rights Protection Act, which allows parents and students as they get older to request all the data that's been collected about them, all the school records that a school maintains about them, but also parents' permission, right? And obviously COPPA builds that into on the verifiable parental consent. And here you'll see on the first bullet where a school can act as a parent's agent in that environment. So at the end of the day, and we've had this conversation with some developers where they don't understand, just because they're in a school, they still need to get consent, right? There's still a consent process involved.
Absolutely. And Abhi, we were just talking, you have some school districts actually reaching directly out to you because you have so many educational platforms that are being used in schools. So can you give us some context as to what those conversations are looking like and why they're reaching out directly?
Yeah,
sure.
Go ahead, Abhi.
All right, so basically, given the fact that we have multiple platforms that have always been sort of whitelisted in schools, and not just schools, let's define schools here, schools, libraries, any sort of public institution that imparts sort of education. So generally what they do is, it's not that you can access any site, they allow the site to be accessed. We are fortunate that most of our sites that are COPPA compliant are allowed in schools. So what generally schools are doing now, or school districts, even states, what they're doing now is they have published a new sort of a policy. They are sending it to publishers like ourselves to say, hey, can you please tell us what kind of data are you collecting? And based on that, they are taking a decision whether to continue to whitelist you or remove you. So basically, fortunately, because most of our sites are COPPA compliant, we do not collect any data. And because we do not collect any data, we continue to enjoy being in schools. I have no idea for those who collect any sort of data, what happens. we continue to be. And so far, we have received requests from California, from New Hampshire, from Massachusetts. So, we continue to get these requests, and these are statewide.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful to understand. And, one of the other factors here is food and beverage advertisers and their ability to even be able to run in these environments. A lot of times these tools are being, used as a reward system, or it's a gamified learning environment to help kids, some of which come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, to just have those access to these free tools to keep them learning on math and spelling and all this stuff. And there's been some groups that I know if they had their way, they would never advertise to kids under 13 at all, which obviously is not possible, because these platforms are, they're built on leveraging advertising dollars to be able to keep these platforms free. So one that I know that a lot of people are passionate about on this call about is CSPI and kind of their push on the CFBAI on, keeping unhealthy foods out of the classroom. And I think that there's this gray area in the terms of, what does it mean to be in a classroom? What does it mean to be a kid's educational platform? Right?
Real quick, everyone. So the CFBAI is a third party that meets with some of the largest brands in the world, from a Burger King to Campbell's to Dannon and Mondelez, and they have basically said, or gave again, I know the legal term, so don't hold me to it. They've recommended that anyone who sells these kind of brands, sugary snacks or things like that, should not advertise to kids in school. The problem is, when the pandemic hit, school then became, ubiquitous, right? It was at home, it was in the class. So basically everyone just stopped. The problem with that is, if you had an ed tech company or an advertising based or an educational website or app that you made your living on through advertising, that went away. So all of a sudden they said, okay, well, we're giving away free content that's helping the community, it's helping the world. We're teaching kids in school, but we can't support it anymore financially without the support from advertisers. So that's kind of the rub which we're dealing with right now, which is the CFBAI and the CSPI. I don't know if Donna, you want to add some more clarity.
Sure. So just to clarify a couple of things, those companies like Burger King, McDonald's, Mondelez, all of those who are members of CFBI have committed to a pledge, which basically says, in part, that they will not advertise unhealthy foods, right? So there's a nutritional guideline. And the rub here with CSPI is how they are kind of taking our pledge. Let's be clear, CFBI, the Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative, is one of many programs that BBBNationalPrograms like KRU also operates. So we work closely together, KRU and CFBI work closely together. But the pledge that these companies take is with regards to how they can advertise foods and when they can advertise the foods, right? But the bottom line is that they're not advertising unhealthy foods to children. CSPAI, I think one of their issues is just, again, Anthony, to what you said earlier, advertising at all in school, right, is problem number one for them, that there should be no advertising, to kids at all, and which is a non-starter of a conversation, right? If we want a free internet, if we want these platforms to exist, there must be advertising dollars to support them. So they've missed the value that these platforms are providing and the need for advertising dollars to support them. I think it was a path of least resistance for some of these companies to just right now to the end of 2020 say, okay, you know what, we're just going to pull our advertising, but we've committed to revisiting this conversation. These advertisers have committed to revisiting this conversation with regards of how to really do this, right? So I think over time, Anthony and Jayson, we've talked about, well, how can this be done, right? So maybe making ads static, right? So let's talk about what the problems are, right? And again, this goes back to what are the harms that we're trying to protect kids from? And we've addressed that in CFBI because we're not advertising unhealthy foods. So that issue is resolved, right? If you're with CFBI and you've committed to this, you're not advertising unhealthy foods. And you're not doing things during school hours and school time, back to your original point of what does school time now look like, right? And we've had long conversations about, if you looked at engagement on these platforms pre-pandemic, it's going to be a pretty steady curve of onboarding at probably 8 a.m. and offboarding at probably between 3 to 4 p.m., right? During the pandemic, we're seeing a roller coaster. We're seeing this and that, right? Because kids can onboard as early as 7 o'clock in the morning and probably go offline 8 or 9 p.m., depending on when their parents are able to, work with them and give them access. So we're looking at an elongated day for children behind the screens. And what does that mean? That's maybe possibly more advertising, more eyeballs throughout the day than advertisers would normally get. And platforms also have more engagement, right? Which is not a bad thing. But how do we figure this out?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to keep it moving, and we've got a couple more questions that we want to answer here. So we're going to save them for the question slide. But, ultimately, I think it's important to really differentiate, what does an educational platform mean? And what is a gaming site that happens to be about math or spelling or whatever it is, right? And I think really looking at those two things independently of one another is really going to help us define what a kids ed tech platform is comparatively to, hey, this is a casual gaming site, but it's a math-based casual gaming site, and really start to lay out that framework. So I'm gonna skip this slide and go into who we think is doing.
Anthony, real quick, you had two questions that pertain to that last slide. So I'm gonna just queue up those if you don't mind.
Yep.
The first question is, I run an ed tech business that offers a learning platform to schools for free. And I support my business through running Google ads on the platform. What can I do to remain compliant?
So I don't know if Abhi wants to answer that, because he may be able to answer that question better.
So I think my answer is quite simple. Given the fact that 100% of my inventory is done with Playwire, I basically just rely on them to do the right thing. But on a very simple term, I do know that even on Google Ads, you can say that your site is targeted at kids, and that Google Ads immediately puts your site in the COPPA section and only deliver COPPA compliant ads. But then you start to lose a lot of revenue, and this is why we partnered with Playwire to boost it for us.
That was not a setup question, by the way. Thank you, Abhi. One more just tidbit of that. Just because you're COPPA compliant does not mean you're family or kid friendly advertising compliant, or not even compliant. Meaning you could be COPPA compliant and show horrendous looking ads. They're just not targeted. So we spend a lot of time vetting through the ads, adding block lists, adding filters to make sure that not only COPPA compliant, but we're kid safe and family friendly compliant. So all the ads that are shown are remain in that realm. The second question is, how do we ensure the publisher is following CFBAI regulations outside of a demo targeting 13 and above?
So I probably don't have a good answer for that, because CFBI is limited. Its regulations are intended for the 12 and under space, right? So it just doesn't apply to over 12.
Great, thanks, Dona.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. So who's doing it right? And we wanted to hold up our partnership with Steve and Spark and Mattel, because we saw such great success and so much learning. So teeing it up for you, Steve, I'd love for you to kind of articulate some of the things that we've talked about and being your business challenges, or really your campaign logistics and challenges, and we can talk about a little bit what we've done to help navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. And I think we've talked a lot about this space is hard, it's complex, it's confusing, and I think when I first started in the kid world, it was interesting because I had this complete misconception, right? Like, oh, well, there's not that much you can do because you can't target kids, you can't leverage data, so it's going to be easier, right? In fact, it's the opposite, right? It's working through the complexities to make sure we're doing what we're doing in a kid-safe way. But when you take a look at what's on the page here, we've got many campaigns running at the very same time. We need to make sure that we're not only reaching kids in safe ways at scale, which we've been able to do, and we'll talk more about how we've been able to do that through COPPA compliant deal IDs. But then we can't just reach kids, right? We've got to make sure that we're actually engaging them. So then it comes to, how do we actually think about KPIs that we're allowed to leverage, and take those KPIs and make sure that our campaigns are set up for success from an engagement perspective. And then, of course, making sure that we're able to scale that across various platforms. you talked a little bit about the fact that, earlier that day parts are changing, the world is changing, the landscape was already changed drastically before we jumped into a pandemic, and that's just been accelerated, right? So as we think about the landscape now, we need a different approach, and we weren't really thinking as much, years ago about programmatic in the kids space, but we've been successful really working with you guys to think about how we can leverage COPPA compliant deal IDs. It's been really successful for us in thinking about how we can, in the last slide, I talked about 20 plus campaigns at the exact same time. How do we, handle all of that? How do we handle the fact that our budgets are changing, our creative's changing, inventory changes, we've got to, make quick changes in real time. And not that that's impossible to do with a direct relationship, but a programmatic relationship adds, just an extra level of speed and transparency and efficiency.
Absolutely. And I'll just call out that this is probably the biggest point of failure on the COPPA side when it comes to setting up deal IDs. I think a lot of brands are open to it and want to be there and testing this just because the transparency and control that it provides them. But there's a lot of extra hoops that you have to jump through for setting up a COPPA deal. And it starts with these 5 steps. And if you're not doing these 5 steps, then odds are you're not running on COPPA compliant inventory, or at least inventory that's not being flagged as directed to a kid, which conversely puts you at risk. Could potentially mean that platform isn't abiding by all of the things that we've talked about today that are required to maintain COPPA law. So this is a big transition for us in our business. Jayson,
I was going to say, this is probably, as Anthony pointed out, the biggest point of failure. Is as much as programmatic is fantastic, humans are also involved, and humans are just doing things certain ways. I would say a lot of the times, if not most of the time, tags come through and they'll layer on like Nielsen data or or a tracking pixel, which they think is COPPA, and like, no, you cannot do that. So a lot of the times we're kind of working with the agencies to just understand the legalities of it, because which something might be like an innocent mistake, as Mamie pointed out. Too bad, you make a mistake, it's going to cost you. So a lot of the times we're doing our diligence, checking, double checking, triple checking.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and because there's risk, right? If you're not following these steps properly, I think a lot of folks think, oh, well, we can't do programmatic in kids. Those two things don't go together. And I think that's a little bit of an easy excuse, right? They do go together if you're doing it in the way you kind of laid out in the slide before it. So I think it's super important that it's very much doable, and there are real advantages to doing so as long as we're doing it in the right way, which we've, had a really successful year doing. And then just thinking about, again, day parts, what does that even mean anymore? And, a school from home, totally different linear changing landscape. And it means really thinking about, entire ecosystems. So, I don't have to obviously read every single opportunity that exists, but, the idea really is when we think about what, a day looks like, right? It's everything. It's gaming, it's in-app, it's OTT and CTV, it's all the things. And how do we take all of our brands? Because, I mentioned, some of the, the brands we've all heard of, Barbie, Hot Wheels, again, 20 plus brands running at the exact same time. How do we make sure we're taking the nuances of those brands, the different way kids are, engaging and behaving every single day, and make sure we're really leveraging kind of that multi-touch point strategy. But it's not just reaching them, right? As I mentioned before, we really need to make sure we're reaching them in a way that's engaging. Obviously, again, reach, super important, but that sometimes is the easy part. How do we do that differently? One thing we've been able, successful with you guys is, not only leveraging kids audience match, which is a fantastic opportunity, but doing it in a way that, you mentioned creative before, takes the creative assets we have, and then we get to work with you and quite simply take that creative and make it more engaging for the particular platform, right? Mattel has world-class creative and world-class creators, right? But how do we take that and make it, right for each individual platform? Because every platform on that slide before is unique and it is different. And I also mentioned earlier that, you have to partner with folks who know the space. So having you guys, at Playwire, for example, being able to take the assets we have and adapt them to your environment, it makes a tremendous difference in the results we're seeing.
Well, you couldn't have teed that up any better for this next slide, right? Because the previous slide was programmatic and being able to take these high impact units and deploy them at scale, even programmatically, layer on some contextual target, or like use contextual targeting practices to find the right audience. But we had an awesome partnership with Pop over the whole year. And we're able to create some really immersive experiences for you guys using Pop's ability to create these immersive worlds, right? It's basically an amusement park without borders. And I think we were able to bring your different dolls to life in such a unique and authentic way that the time spent and the engagement was insane. And conversely, so is the purchase intent at that point, right? If a kid is going to spend that amount of time with your brand and interact with your characters in that way, the likelihood that they're going to ask their parents or whoever their decision maker in the household to buy that product for them is infinitely higher than a banner ad or a pre-roll on a YouTube page. So really, really impactful stuff that we were able to accomplish on not only the media side, but also the custom Poptropica side. So
I also think it goes to our partnerships, right? So not only with Mattel, but with also Pop and Abhi, where they've done a lot of first to market opportunities where they wanted to come up with, hey, what are some new ideas? And Abhi and his team would come back to us like movie theaters. And Abhi, what are some of the other interesting things that we've done together that are unique?
So I think Poptropica is a unique space where we can do a lot of collaboration. I mean, we've done things like, with you guys, Jayson, we've done things like AR. We did something in AR for Disney, if you remember. We did photo booths where kids can go take photo. Photo doesn't go out of the platform, but at least they can enjoy those sort of things. We've done games and prizes. We've done movie theaters. We did the movie theater with American Girl, which was very popular. So because of the sort of a virtual world kind of framework, we are able to do a lot of things. And this is where I think the example of what Steve was saying, collaboration helps, because we can really work hand in hand to say, okay, it's a 12-month partnership. After a month, what do we offer? And we can keep revising. And this is why the engagement on videos, the engagement of content is so high. So this is, that's the beauty of Pop.
Thanks,
yeah, I think a great word, Anthony, earlier when you said insane. When you look at 300%, to benchmark, it is kind of insane. And I think, to Abhi's point, it's programmed to the platform. So much of what we just talked about is making sure that we're truly programming to the platform, because what you can do on the huge array of, platforms that you guys as one, massive partner have, it's not going to work if we just continue to run the same assets in every single area. So what it's allowed us to really do, in thinking about programs to the platform, it's send our engagement through the roof. The game that we talked about, not only did we see success, on, the platform, you guys actually let us run that on, Mattel's O&O. We saw tremendous success there as well, which was great. Took the partnership from, what started as US and Canada to beyond, and ended up being a global partnership. So kind of replicating that success for the nuanced, markets, in, our global regions. Huge amount, 13 total IPs. We talked about, all the different products we supported, and supported them each in different ways based on what made sense for the brand and what made sense for that brand on that platform. So ultimately, lots of key takeaways here, but, performing above benchmark based on programs to the platform, really thinking about how that CTR overperformed. And then just, again, that engagement, when you look at numbers like 15 plus minutes spent, that's tremendous.
Yeah, love it. Love it. So thank you guys. I want to tee it up for any questions. I don't see any in the chat. I definitely want to grab a couple minutes.
There was one question, Anthony. I know you answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just because I think it's super important, especially as 2022 rolls around. Are frequency caps and DV360 allowed in COPPA campaigns? So, I think there's today, but there's also 6 months from now where there's all kind of crazy rules around, what happened to the deprecation of cookies. So I would love some feedback from actually anyone on this, because I don't know the answer.
Nathan, maybe you but look, the answer is, yeah, we can do it. We need to be able to set the F caps on our side, but Nathan.
Well, that's now, right? But what happens in 2022?
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly. So good point on the F caps. To frequency cap, there has to be a cookie sync that happens between the SSP and the DSP, and that already can cause issues under COPPA, again, by kind of syncing pixels across different platforms. So that's why a very important step for successful programmatic COPPA campaigns is to actually apply the frequency cap on us that we applied on a publisher partner level. We control the stack on our side, so we can make sure that there isn't an overload by ads, and we can make sure that the frequency is met that the advertiser needs, but should not be applied on the advertiser side. Now, to jump ahead 6 months, 8 months, whenever it may come, right now all the SSPs are using cookies and synced cookies across platforms to frequency cap, and that is going to go away. As third-party cookies will not be allowed. So it's still up for debate, like if and how exactly frequency capping will work. It's part of the Google Privacy Sandbox. And obviously there are a lot of ID solutions popping out, but all these ID solutions actually require consent under current CMP frameworks. So if and how that gets translated into COPPA is a whole nother process that the industry is gonna have to go through.
I got one more for you, Nathan. So I'm going to keep you on the hot seat. There was a reference to the setup via DV360 regarding third-party tags or tracking pixels.
Yes.
Does this include DCM, impressions, click tags, and moat viewability, brand safety, etc.?
Very good question, and the answer is yes. So even DCM, impression tracking pixels, click tracking pixels, what have you, are not allowed to be placed in DV360. It will not transact on COPPA inventory.
Well, there you have it, gentlemen.
It must be applied, and this is something we can do, it must be applied on the publisher side. So we can apply, it cannot be applied in the DSP.
Thank you, Nathan. So guys, please keep the questions coming. I know we've only got about 5 more minutes, and I'm gonna use those last 5 minutes as a shameless plug to just show you guys a couple of the fun new things that we've got going on. If you guys have more questions, I would say drop them in the Q&A, or we're also going to be following up with a brief questionnaire. After this, you'll have the ability to ask some questions there. We're going to be following up with a couple of leave behinds for you guys as well, so you can kind of collect all of this information and use it for your own strategy purposes. But if there's no other questions, I'm going to go right into my my shameless plug here. So I know a lot of you guys are already working with us, so I'm not going to give you the 411 of who we are or what's new, but ultimately we've got some really exciting new things happening in the mobile space, right? We've added thousands of new kids apps, but there's one in particular that I'm very, very excited about. We've just signed an exclusive partnership in North America with our partners at Outfit 7. Outfit 7 is home to the Talking Tom games and Talking Angela games. Arguably, actually not arguably, one of the largest kids mobile app game providers in the world, over 410 million monthly active users across the globe. And we are bringing 2 new units that have never been done before in the 10-year history of this organization in these mini games and these dream bubbles. We're very excited about this. This is our first really, really massive partner on the mobile app space. And it's just, helping us to round out our offering for you guys so we can make sure your brand's staying top of mind for kids throughout the day. The other call out, and since we've been talking a lot about Pop Tropica and a lot of the fun stuff that we can do, well, Pop is kind of getting reinvigorated, right? There's a new mobile presence that they're having, kind of relaunching themselves as a mobile game, tons of new content. And as it relates to advertisers like yourself, we're going to have a bunch of new customization features, from a store on the home island that will allow us to create more brandability inside the game and bring your characters and your IP to life inside the game, as well as making it more of that virtual world that we're seeing become just so much more popular in the space. The Robloxes of the world, the Minecrafts of the world, that's where kids are playing. So we wanted to create a safe multiplayer game, and there'll be some really interesting ways that we're going to be able to integrate our partners, and new ways to be able to integrate our partners into Pop Tropica. We've talked a lot about contextual targeting and some of the things that we can do there, whether it's using some of the grade levels to make sure that we're in the right age demo, or finding different boys or girls based on the context of the content. But the big thing that we've been hearing a lot, and we've seen a lot of success for, is more of the multicultural skew, where we see dollars really flowing that way. And a lot of brands, like McDonald's, for example, loves to be able to target Spanish speakers. And we have tons of content that are native Spanish language content that's safe for kids. So beyond the typical stuff, age demo, like racing games, ninja games, etc. We actually have the ability to help you find multicultural kids as well. So, that's that. I wanted to just give you guys a couple minutes back to your day and know that we're going to send this over and allow you guys to digest it on your own time. But we very much thank you for taking your lunch time today to hear us out and learn a little bit more about COPPA 2.0. We would appreciate any feedback you could give us because we want to keep doing this, right? We want to make sure that if you're going to give us your time, that we're going to create valuable experiences and valuable webinars for you guys. So give us some feedback, and we're going to keep doing these types of things. So on that note,
and thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Abhi. Thank you, Dona. Thank you, Mamie. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Steve. Sorry,
Thank
Steve.
you. Yeah,
You
feel free to contact us with any questions or help that we can provide.
Yes.
and
if you haven't signed up for Karu's conference, which is on June 8th and 9th,
there you go,
a
Mamie.
lot of what's been talked about today will be talked about further, and you may have great questions to help us in our discussion to dive a little deeper into what we went into today. So,
Dona, is there a link you could share with us that we could circulate to anyone who's on here just so they could sign up for your conference?
Yeah, actually, I'll send that to you because we're also providing, if you sign up through Playwire's link, then you get a 10% discount to the conference. So we'll get that over
Saving
to
you guys money, and we're protecting the safe harbor. There you go.
There you go.
Love it. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
bye-bye.